Welcome back to Talk of the Town. I am Steve Noxon, and joining me on the phone now is State Senator Rob Sampson. Before we start, Senator Sampson, can you name that band?
Was it Creedence? I wasn't even really paying attention.
All right. It was Leonard Skinner, but I just figured it was a little bit before your time, being a Red Hot Chili Peppers fan.
I'm batting zero on the music choices.
You will never hear a Red Hot Chili Peppers.
Well, and I would have recognized that had I been paying attention.
You will never hear a Red Hot Chili Peppers bumper on the show, so don't.
I won't hold my breath.
Yeah, never. So, Senator Sampson, first of all, happy holidays to you, sir. How have you been?
I have been well. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to you and your staff over there at WATR. Thank you for all you do.
And thank you for taking the time out to speak with us as often as you do. First of all, I want to congratulate you. Rather surprising recognition here. The Connecticut Conference of Municipalities honored you as a legislative champion for 2021. I imagine that was a bit of a surprise for you.
It was a little bit of a surprise. I mean, I like to think I'm a legislative champion sometimes, but you're right. CCM is not known as an organization that typically leans far to the right or for traditional Republican values, the kind that I espouse as fearlessly as I can in the legislature. So it was nice of them to notice, and I think it's largely in part. There's a few issues that I think I've been very vocal on the last couple of years that certainly are going to affect towns and cities of all sizes in Connecticut. The trend by the Connecticut Democrats to try and basically co-opt the local zoning laws of towns and cities and put them under state control is something that I am very much against and opposed to and fought very loudly against. As well as a lot of other things that have to do with the state budget, funding for different municipalities. And I also serve as the ranking Republican on the Labor Committee, so essentially the leader of the opposition. And this past year, there were just so many bad bills that were going to affect municipalities in a big way, having them required to provide all sorts of information for labor unions and so forth, things that would have been detrimental to municipal budgets. And I think they appreciated that I fought pretty hard against those things. So I'm really excited to be honored by CCM, and I think it's great, and I hope it's a trend going forward.
Well, I think it's certainly well-deserved, especially as they pointed out when they recognized you, you helped promote transparency in government. Which I think is sorely lacking and even more sorely needed at this particular time, as we're seeing how people are still using this COVID pandemic to further their own ends. One of those, and we just had a caller talking about this in the last half hour, is this digital passport or these digital vaccine cards. I firmly believe that these are incremental steps towards something that they really want to accomplish. And it was like the tolls. Well, all they needed to do was get one toll booth up somewhere in Connecticut, and then all bets were off. They could do whatever they wanted because they'd already broken through the biggest hurdle. And so the same thing here with these digital vaccine cards. Look, if you got the vaccine, you got a card. If you want a copy of that card on your phone, take a picture of it. Why do we need to set up a database with all of this protected health information, by the way, that should not be available to anyone due to HIPAA regulations, just to be able to show somebody that you've been vaccinated?
Yeah, you're absolutely correct, Steve. And the answer is you don't. You can carry the card. You can take a picture of it. You do not need to engage in using some sort of software that tracks your information and would give that information to others for who knows what purpose in the future. It really is a can of worms. It's really hard to describe, from my perspective, exactly what I'm concerned about because it's a whole spectrum of things. It could be something as simple as, Democrats are the big government party, and they believe government is there to help us, and they want to have as much information so that they can do so. That would be on the more benevolent side of the spectrum, or it could be something much more nefarious, such as implementing some sort of mandatory requirement for these vaccine passports down the road. Either way, I don't like it. and I have been very outspoken since the beginning that I think the entire coronavirus pandemic has been something that has been used as a tool by the far left in this country and even more mainstream Democrats as a means to their ends, which is to gain more power and control as a political party and a force in American politics. And, the whole thing to me is I can't wait for people to wake up. If you look at the United States as a whole, and you start to compare states, and the most obvious comparison is the one that keeps being made even by people on the left, and that is Connecticut versus Florida. You realize that in Connecticut we have all sorts of protocols. We're still under an emergency order. We have mandated masks in schools. We have all of these things going on, and in Florida they have none of this. And yet, when you compare the data about infections, about deaths, about things like that, it turns out Florida is in better shape than Connecticut. And how is that? It's inexplicable when you listen to the evening news and they are trying to promote this, complete feeling of fear that is really gripping the state right now. I mean, the whole notion of sending out all of these free home test kits, which I will say, just as an aside, Steve, I'm very much in favor of the home test kits. I wish they did that a year ago. To me, that would have made more sense than any of this other stuff. But why? I mean, the thing to me is that the number of deaths at this point, while everyone is significant, it's still extremely low. I think we are bordering on maybe something like 30 or 40 deaths per week, mostly people 75 and up, nursing home age, people that, traditionally pass with similar numbers from things like the flu and so forth. And yet this is being promoted as something that is ripping through our entire society as the number one fear and concern that we should all be, living, under our beds about.
Yeah, I mean, there was a Yale medical director for infection prevention, assistant medical director for infection prevention, that said that it's possible that more than half the state will end up testing positive. Yeah, but that doesn't talk about the seriousness of this new variant that we're learning is not that big a deal. People get it, don't even know they have it. And if they do, they're experiencing very mild symptoms. And then we see the studies coming out of South Africa that say that if you come down with the Omicron variant, it is actually provides you immunity to the Delta variant. But nobody talks about this. It's like we've just thrown science right out the window.
Right. Well, I mean, two great points there. And thank you for being someone who is talking about that, because more people do need to understand the reality of the coronavirus and its impact on American citizens. I have been exploring the science and talking truthfully about this since the very beginning. My job as a state senator is to represent my constituents, and I believe it's my obligation to truly understand what's going on, to investigate the science, and tell the truth in all cases, good or bad. And I'm surrounded by people that are simply promoting falsehoods or listening to them without the question. And both things cannot continue if we want to get out of this mess. We need people to start thinking objectively and start looking at the data. I mean, I don't even like the term vaccine, by the way, because a vaccine implies something. My whole life, a vaccine was something that you took that would prevent you from being infected by a particular illness, and something that would prevent you from spreading it to other people. This vaccine doesn't do either, so I don't really like calling it a vaccine. And I think what people on the please take the vaccine side of the spectrum fail to understand is that the people that are fighting so hard against taking the vaccine and are very concerned about this growth of government and the need for vaccine proof and things like that, their issue probably really isn't the vaccine in most cases. People I talk to, they would gladly take the vaccine, except that they're not convinced of two things, and that is whether or not it is safe or effective. And I think as time goes on, we realize more and more that the vaccine, quote unquote, is not as safe or effective as is claimed by people that are pushing it. And the larger issue, obviously, as the conversation started, is the government control aspect, which is the thing that concerns me more than anything. And not to go on, but I believe you're right. I believe Omicron might be a blessing in disguise. I think that is the one thing people don't realize, Pete, is that the entire coronavirus, all the variants since the very beginning, has really been a terrible sickness only for a very select portion of the population, which is, people in their 70s, 80s, and above, and particularly people that have other underlying conditions. To date, in Connecticut, the number of people that have died under 60 years of age from coronavirus since the very beginning, I don't think has surpassed 700. And, of course, every one of those deaths is a tragedy, but 700 deaths in 2 years from a flu-like illness is not a significant number in a state of 3.5 million people. The point is there is a susceptible population, and we should have always focused on protecting those people first and let everyone else go about their business.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And getting back to this vaccine, this digital vaccine card, maybe the people right now currently in power don't have any plans to abuse this access to this information. But that doesn't mean that down the road it can't be, because as we've seen with so many other things in government, it's all done incrementally. They don't make these big, huge, monstrous changes overnight. They do them little tiny bites at a time, so you don't really feel it happening until it's done.
Right, and they hide behind, their incrementalism in a way that is very suspicious anyway. Lamont, when he came out and announced the vaccine cards, he made a very large point to say that it wasn't going to be mandated. And that's great. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. It should not be mandated. But on the other side of his mouth, he's suggesting that businesses implement it voluntarily, and he's trying to give them a nudge to do so. And then, when you respond and say, Governor, that's inappropriate for the government to get into that sort of coercion that will ultimately end in the segregation of, Connecticut citizens by whether or not they partake of some sort of, vaccine. He calls you, it says you're fear-mongering. That's not fear-mongering. What fear-mongering is trying to scare the population that they're going to die from a virus that the vast majority of people are not even going to have significant symptoms from, and trying to impose government regulations and to use, your language and your bully pulpit as a method to coerce behavior that discriminates against a certain population. That's actual fear-mongering.
Well, and also the frightening thing about this, too, is you have elected officials who believe that we're not really tyrants because we're taking away privileges from you until you do what we want you to do. No, that's true. That's pretty much the definition of a tyrant. You don't have to mandate it. You just have to make it so personally uncomfortable, maybe taking away someone's livelihood, maybe taking away someone's ability to go into a restaurant, maybe taking away someone's ability to live life in a normal way, in a normal fashion. That's not a mandate per se, but it is a form of force.
Yes, no, it's completely un-American, and it's despicable behavior. And it's disappointing. And I was thinking this morning, somebody I was talking to was trying to describe to me, how the Democrats and Republicans in Connecticut have evolved over time. And my experience goes back to 2010 when I was first elected, and I think at the time there were a few moderates that still existed in the Democrat Party in the House and Senate. Today, those people are gone. Almost every person that I serve with on the Democrat side is a pretty radical progressive leftist and really pushing a hard agenda. I would even put Governor Lamont as maybe one of the more moderate folks in the Democrat Party in Connecticut, which to me is shocking because he's pretty far left himself, but he may be one of the more moderate ones. But look at what he has done. This is a man who has extended his emergency powers, is it 6 or 7 times? I can't even remember. When there is not even a single moment, maybe outside the first few weeks of the pandemic, that could truly be described as an emergency that would require the elimination of the legislature being able to conduct its business and determine policy for the state. The whole point of the 2 weeks to flatten the curve was not to overwhelm our hospitals in the state. Our hospitals have never been overwhelmed, not for 1 minute. Maybe in individual circumstances, there are individual hospitals for a period of moments, but on the whole, we have never reached that amount. In fact, The last time the governor renewed his emergency powers back at the end of September, I believe the hospitalization utilization rate, according to the state and the federal government, was around 2% of our hospital beds were being used for the coronavirus. And yet that was justification for the Democrats to go ahead and renew the governor's executive authority and essentially circumvent not just the legislators. And this is what your listeners need to realize. They're not just circumventing me and the other representatives and senators in the state. They are circumventing you. They are circumventing the people that you elect to be your voice and instead, give it over to one person. And for a reason that clearly is not legitimate.
Well, he even said at the time he was doing this just in case he needed to use them. And in my mind, I thought to myself, that is the worst justification you could make for extending these powers. You don't get to do it just in case. If you don't have a reason right now for these emergency powers, then you should give them up. Don't extend them just in case. That was amazingly telling to me.
Yeah, and of course it makes no sense either, since the governor was able to institute his emergency powers on a moment's notice when he needed to back in February or March of 2020. And if that situation arose again, he would be able to do the same thing. You do not need to do something in advance just in case. He has that power at his fingertips if he needs to exercise it. And the only check on it, according to our laws, is a response by the legislative leaders within a certain period of time. If there was a legitimate emergency, we'd have no reason to assume that they would challenge that. And being that no one's challenged his authority all this time, yeah. I think there's no fear about that. So it's a completely phony and made-up reason. And exactly as you said, it is only a reason that is suitable to someone who does not care about our legislative process or our constitutional values or the way we operate in America with a system of representative government. Clearly, the governor doesn't care about those things, and I don't care who's offended that I said that. That's true based on the facts on the ground.
Well, I find it to be also a bit of malfeasance on the part of the Democrat leaders to not want to take these powers back and just to continue to allow him to extend them because it's easier for them as well. Then they don't have to be held accountable for any decisions that they might have to make. And I think that's also just a major disservice.
Yeah, they've got the best of both worlds, Steve. They're able to conduct legislative business. I mean, we had a full legislative cycle last time. Of course, they manipulated COVID to make the circumstances better for them by allowing for only Zoom-type public hearings and meetings, essentially shutting out a large portion of the public, terminating public comment at midnight instead of allowing thousands of other people who wanted to testify on major issues, including the removal of the religious exemption for vaccines. Huge things. They basically, eliminated the people's voice over and over again to push their agenda. And they were able to get all of the, the good things that they wanted to do while simultaneously leaving the hard decisions that might be politically damaging to the governor. So they were off the hook for those things. It's a very clever game plan, but it's also a very un-American and very one that should create distrust among the public. And I hope that comes back to bite them in this upcoming election. The Democrats have really damaged themselves, I think, significantly over the last 12 months. I mean, they've been damaging themselves for 40 years, in my opinion, but over the last year, with the rise in crime, the cost of living increase, and this complete abuse of power on behalf of the governor and the legislative leaders in the Democrat Party, abusing the COVID situation for their own political gain. Those things really, really, I think, are making people wake up and take notice. And I hope it leads to a big shift in the power of the state.
Well, I just find it hard to justify the fact that he still has these emergency powers, meaning basically that the state is still in a state of emergency, and yet he takes his vacation time and heads on down to Florida, the place we're told is horrible when it comes to COVID response. Talk about just a completely tone-deaf messaging. It's just amazing to me. So we have this new next legislative session starting when?
It starts February 9th, I believe. So
okay.
Coming soon.
Yeah, it's coming up fast. Real quick, any ideas on what you think it's going to be like this time around?
Well, I'm very concerned on whether or not the legislature is going to be open and conducting legitimate public hearings as we are supposed to, or we will be, back in, the world of Speaker Matt Ritter, who wants us doing everything on Zoom and outside the building and, masked up at home on our Zooms. It's just madness. There's no reason for this. And we need to restore the legislative process so that we can restore the faith in Connecticut citizens that we are working on their behalf. But that's the biggest concern I have. I expect that they are going to try and put some legislation forward to make it appear that they're attempting to address the crime issue. But they won't do that seriously. It's the same exact people in power today that put the bad policies in place that have led to the crime wave. They're certainly not going to change their stripes or the policies they put in place. They'll put a few Band-Aids to make it look good. But meanwhile, that problem will persist until the people of Connecticut get frustrated enough to throw them out of office and replace them with Republicans who will do something. There's a myriad of other issues. CRT is going to be a big issue this year. I'm going to make sure of that. I believe education in our state has kind of gotten away from where it should be, and we need to get a handle on that. The cost of living, the cost of energy is huge. They did a Band-Aid fix last year also on energy and the cost of electricity, which really didn't help things much. And we need serious policy changes to make that happen. So I'm going to continue to be a loud voice to make those things happen. But really, it's going to rely on whether or not the people of this state demand those changes and change their representatives.
Well, I think Senator Looney has already given you a hint on how he plans on addressing this juvenile justice situation, and that's just throwing more money at it, throwing more money at mental health services and things like that. And I just don't know how anybody can listen to that kind of a response and think, well, what have you been doing in the past? This is, that's all you've ever done in the past was throw money at this, and it's not solved the problem.
Right. Well, I mean, the Democrats' business model today is to create a crisis, no matter what it is, whether it be COVID or a crime wave or the terrible roads and bridges in the state or whatever it is. You have a crisis, and now you have an excuse to go to the people to create more government and probably more taxation and spending to go along with it to solve that problem. But at the same time, they never actually fixed those problems, because if they did, then they wouldn't have the excuse to go back to the well again. Every budget that has been passed since I've been there, and I have not voted for any budget that has become law in Connecticut, every one of them, at the very time we were voting on the budget on that day, we knew that there was a deficit created in the out years by that budget. On the very day we were voting for it, every time. To me, that is inexcusable, and every person in the state should be ashamed of their representatives for acting in that way. They should be held to account for it.
Well, I know you're going to keep holding their feet to the fire, and I think you do a fantastic job of that no matter what the issue is. And I think this honor that you've gotten from the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities is well-deserved, and hopefully this is going to be a bit of a bellwether for how that organization is going to be acting moving forward, and also how our legislature is going to be acting moving forward, because I think we need to get more people paying attention, especially this particular year, and understand the freedoms that have been stripped from us over the last couple of years, and we need to work to get them back. We cannot continue down the path that we're on.
Amen to all of that, Steve. We get the government we deserve, and thankfully I think people are starting to realize that, the people running our state are kind of out of control, and they need to be reined in. So hopefully that's going to make voices a little bit louder and get us on a new path sooner rather than later. And I hope the new year, 2022, can't be any worse than 21. Right?
Don't say that. We said that at the end of 2020. Don't even risk saying that. Senator Sampson, as always, an absolute pleasure having you on. Happy New Year, sir, and we'll look forward to talking to you again soon.
Same to you, Steve. Till the next time. Thank you so much.
Take care.